Well, hey everybody, thank you so much for catching my PlatformCon talk. I'm Ravi Lachhman and I'm super excited to be talking at PlatformCon 2022. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're talking about scaling the truth. Is legacy Kubernetes workloads a thing? I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but stick around and we'll talk about how even your most modern workloads will eventually turn into a legacy workload, and then how can you design a platform to kind of cope with that. So a little bit about myself. Again, I'm Ravi Lachhman. I'm the field CTO at Shippa. A little bit of more of my background. That been building software, I've never gotten something right the first time. It took me a while to figure that out. When I was younger, I used to think stuff worked the first time, but now I know that it did not. And if I get something running correctly the first time, it is not running correctly. And also, because of that, trial and error makes software. We have such an important mission as platform engineers that we want to be able to support iteration, velocity, and safety. So to making sure that when the right combination of trial and error occurs, we're able to ship software. Currently, I act as the field CTO of a firm called Shippa, but prior in my career, I was a chief architect at the continuous delivery firm Harness, and prior to that, I was a distributed systems engineer at Red Hat and Mesosphere and a few other firms. So I was in the Kubernetes world for a little bit, tried to get out, and it took me right back. And so a little bit more detail of what we're going to be talking about in the next 15 minutes or so. They're going to be, well, seriously, legacy Kubernetes workloads. It sounds awkward to say that out loud, but it is true. At some point, any workload will turn to a legacy workload, and we'll discuss what that means. And then also, well, how do you validate the truth, right? So as there's not intrinsic or active engineering going on, if you had to get your hand around, let's say, a topology or taking a census of something, how do you validate what is actually the truth? And the truth might be hard to decipher. And then also we'll talk about here at Shippo, we have an open source project that helps deal with that, and something we saw that was going to be a problem, and we're helping build for that for the future. So let's talk about legacy Kubernetes workloads, right? So let's talk about a few things. So the first thing is, well, the mighty Kubernetes, right? And so Kubernetes will solve all your problems, right? Like if you're an e-commerce firm a decade ago using a big data technology like Hadoop, clearly Hadoop will solve all your logistical problems. As you know, no, a technology by itself will not solve all your problems. Now, there's a lot of greatness about Kubernetes, right? So if we take a look at actually this deployment YAML here, is that we can understand what this means. If you take a look at it, it doesn't matter if you're on the development side or if it doesn't matter if you're on the operations side, this human readable format makes sense. Now there's some templating that goes in there to make it a little bit easier, but one of the core benefits is that, and also as a core challenge is that, hey, if the right or the left can author it, where does expertise come in? That might be another PlatformCon talk for another time, but hey, you know what? It does help level the playing field between the two teams, to take it for what it's worth. But also, Kubernetes is fairly youngish, right? In the grand scheme of things. Now it's becoming more mature. It's you're not considered bleeding edge if you're running Kubernetes workload today. If you take a look at the history of Kubernetes, it hit GitHub in the summer of 2014. 8 years later, as of around the time PlatformCon, Kubernetes is version 1.24, right? And so it's the release cycles are slowing down; they become more predictable. But if you look at what influenced Kubernetes, big web scale firms such as Facebook with Facebook Tupperware, Google with Borg, and even Microsoft with Apollo, these core job and workload schedulers, parts of them or complete portions of them might not ever be open source, right? But they had heavy influence in Kubernetes, and which we have. The ecosystem that we have today. But doing some math, right? So it's 8 years since Kubernetes came out. Imagine running a virtual machine workload, on vSphere or vCenter in 2011, right? So like how many of those workloads that were created around that time are considered legacy, a decade later? It starts to kind of sink in, right? Eventually there will be legacy Kubernetes workloads. One of my favorite things to look at here is the Stack Overflow developer surveys. I read it every year. I'm always super stoked when they put it out. But there's very interesting pieces of data that if you compare, 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, is that if you kind of take a look at what it takes to be a productive engineer, so the time between when you're fully ramped and then to the time you decide to ramp off the team, is that ramping is actually taking longer and longer each year, right? So instead of taking a week or a month, it's taking n number of lengthier and lengthier times for an engineer to become productive on average. Also, not to be a shock, like people's time on the team or time on a project is decreasing. How bread and butter as an engineer, how you gain more skills, you have to move around, right? If that be if it's Spotify or Tribe or Guild type of model or looking externally, you have to move around because again, people will move around, right? So in times that are good and times that are bad, stonks and not stonks, you'll be moving for either different opportunities or it was, one job was too stressful, totally up to you. But hey, you have to design for the human element in platform engineering. Eventually, if everybody moves off, you'll end up with a legacy app, right? So what is like the litmus test or the taste test if an application is actually a legacy application, right? So the big tell there is that there's actually, for my definition of a legacy application, is that there's low or no active development or investment going on in the features of the application. So it is just running, it is just providing functionality. It's going to run till the end of time or run till it gets deprecated. But congratulations, you're adding features. You're starting to smell like a legacy app. But why is this? If you're, as time of the application lifecycle kind of backs off, if there's no active development, there starts to be lack of available expertise, right? So people with intrinsic knowledge, people with tribal knowledge, document as much as you want, but these are the experts who clearly, if they built it, they have expertise level knowledge of what's going on that was acquired over time. If there's lack of expertise, maybe these people have changed teams, or more often they've changed organizations, so you can't ask them certain things. The expertise is gone, and then it actually makes a legacy application generally unattractive to work on. So you can imagine that if you have to patch something, we've all been there, but let's say you were pulled in. Log4Shell is a good example. Now, it might not be a Kubernetes specific example, but we need to bump Log4j versions. Imagine how many applications that didn't have an active developer. We hope, our Java build worked or Maven build or whatever worked when we kind of up the version of something. But that's it. Fast forward to the Kubernetes days. How often you have to say, "Oh, we need to up the version of Istio," or "Oh, we need to up the version of some other piece of application infrastructure that's running on Kubernetes." Hey, you know what? If certain teams are not there, it gets a little bit difficult because coming to this. Here I was arbitrarily logged into a Kubernetes cluster here at Shippa. I try to get the pods, and it's like, hey, who wrote all of this? There's one of me, so I didn't write all of that. But this is the particular paradigm that we live in is that, of course, there'll be shared resources in a cluster and whatnot. But who wrote all of this, right? Are all the people here that has written each one of these services, or part of these are pieces of open source that we're using, but are people here? Well, we're a smaller firm, so the answer is yes, we can kind of track down who's written certain things, but as we start to scale, we've definitely seen this going to be a problem, and a lot of us have worked before. Exactly, that's the problem. People have moved on. Now, why is this a problem? Well, let's talk about telling the truth, right? And so, if you had to get, let's say, detailed information about an application, so software bill of material aside, if we had to figure out, hey, what is actually going on, or how did Kubernetes interpret something, or does this even meet our current conformance or policies that we have? What are your options to do, right, as a platform engineer, given that you're supporting a platform that runs dozens or hundreds of workloads? Is that, what's the truth, right? Well, actually, yes, I would say that this is the truth in the system. Here I was able to grab a pod, export it as YAML, and just take a look at what Kubernetes, what it interpreted, and what is it trying to run. But this is the truth, right? And imagine you had to go through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines of this, or not thousands of lines of this. That yes, you have access to the truth, but can you imagine doing this in every single workload that you have? Because imagine if you had to make a change, and you're not the author of the workload, or you're brought in as a maintenance engineer, or even some of your internal customers, if you're a platform engineer, has to make a maintenance change. It can be kind of dicey, right? I hope I'm editing the right thing. Now, clearly, I'm editing something directly here. I didn't submit it. But more often than not, this will be kind of represented in the source code. You might have a GitOps engine that comes in and kind of applies this for you, or auto heals if someone makes a change. But eventually, you'll have to make a change in the configuration, right? That you haven't authored, right? And it has pretty big ramifications if you apply it, and it takes something down. And it gets hard to kind of decipher the truth because imagine I only log into one cluster, but here we have dozens of clusters at Shippa. Now you may divide or add or subtract or multiply that number depending on your scale, but The problem is kind of grows exponentially, right? Like, oh, here's a screenshot of Rancher that we have. Like, oh, okay, this is like, a number of clusters that we have. How do you validate the truth, or how do you visualize the truth with so many running workloads? So many clusters running so many workloads. One thing that we built here at Shippa is a visualization engine that will actually visualize Kubernetes objects, saying, hey, for a given application, these are the 8 or 9 things that are running. This is actually made based off of the backbone of Ketch here, and I'll talk a little bit about Ketch. And I'll talk a little bit about Ketch right now. So you got to catch them all, right? So at Shippa, how do we go about tackling this problem? One, from a policy standpoint, how do we do conformance tests and validate what's, as our posture changes, how do we validate what's going on? And also, how do we visualize these particular things? And this is the genesis and inception of our open source project called Ketch. And so the first thing we want to kind of deal with here is actually, well, what is an application? An intrinsic question that is, right? If, a tree fell in the woods with no one there to hear it, can you hear it? But going back to a question, it's like, hey, in your own words, or your team, what is an app? What is an app? Is it an item and config management database? Is it, a Helm chart? Is it a service address? Is it an address? And this is something that we came up with, kind of like 9 pillars. I'll talk about 4, given this is a shorter 15-minute talk here at PlatformCon. But here at Shippa, our definition of an app is it's a source code or image. It's an address, either internal or publicly accessible. Also, an application has traffic coming in, traffic coming out. So we're able to describe it. We're trying not to use, hey, the app is used for people, right? So we're trying to make a very technical definition of an application. Also, an application has specific environmental variables or a config map, right? That kind of goes along with the lifecycle of the application. This is all what goes inside of an app. And how do we kind of validate these things, right? And so this is the whole purpose of our open source project called Ketch. Love for you to take a look at it. Love for you to just pull a PR. If we're missing something and there's a piece of functionality that you have that you want, feel free to write it. Feel free to extend Ketch. Check out our particular GitHub repository. Love to get your feedback. Love to, for you to pull a PR in Ketch. And if you're curious about how to get started with Ketch, we actually have a getting started guide in the Continuous Delivery Foundation. So if you head over to the blog address here, you can see how to get started with Ketch. We kind of introduced it to the world in 2021. Been getting some good traction, and yeah, if you want to get started leveraging Ketch in your organization, take it for a spin, feel free. And kind of lastly, kind of a big reveal here at PlatformCon is that we're actually building some more stuff on top of Ketch, right? So Shippa, we're building stuff on top of Ketch, and that now in the next upcoming months, we're able to actually ingest Kubernetes workloads that Shippa, our tooling, is unaware of, and actually validate that against certain policies. So hope you'll stay tuned as we kind of build this out and kind of show it to the world. Want to reveal it here at PlatformCon, what we're working on. Definitely, stay in touch, keep in contact. I'm Ravi Lachhman again. You can hit me at Twitter at Ravi Lach. Send me an email, join our community Slack channel, and send to Shippa.io to kind of take a look at the latest. Until next time, enjoy the rest of PlatformCon. Cheers, Ravi.